I would like to officially welcome everybody to the start of Society, Robots and Us. That's a speaker series that we've been doing since mid-2020. And I would like to open tonight with the acknowledgement that I'm personally here on the lands of the Mallozzi tribe of San Francisco, who remain unrecognized as a tribe in the US federal system. And tonight, our Society, Robots and Us discussions continue to explore the meaning of inclusive robotics. Last month, we discussed diversity and inclusivity, and today we're starting another conversation that matters as we talk about assistive robotics, the needs of people with disabilities, and the opportunity for robotics to play a significant part moving forward, now that we do have affordable and collaborative robots capable of being deployed. Anyway, I'm Andra Keay. I'm the Managing Director of Silicon Valley Robotics and a visiting scholar at Citrus in the Benetau Institute in the People and Robotics Lab. I'd like to thank you all in advance, both the speakers and the audience, for being active participants in this conversation. We'll collect your questions in chat, in text, and our speakers will either respond by voice or text as suits them best. We'll finish this call at 7 p.m. But some questions and answers may need a longer follow-up, and we will do that. Today, we will start using a live transcription of the discussion. And while it's not perfect, we will be captioning our conversations moving forward. I did notice that in one of our first videos, the Robots for Humanity project was miscaptioned the Robots for Manatees project. And while I look forward to seeing the Robots for Manatees project in the future, we are actually talking about the Robots for Humanity today. And the video recording will go online in a couple of weeks' time on the Silicon Valley Robotics YouTube channel. And I encourage you to watch our previous Society, Robots and Us conversations. And by the way, we have a couple of other events coming up. On the research side of things, you can watch the Citrus People and Robots Lab seminars each week if you go to the Citrus People and Robots Lab site. You can also join us for the Bots and Beverages social networking event with robot show and tell demos on the first Wednesday evening of each month. So the next one is coming up on Wednesday, the 3rd of March at 7 p.m. We're having a construction robotics forum on March the 11th, and we'll also be scheduling some agricultural and food supply robotics forums and health and medical supply robotics forums for March, but they're not yet on our calendar. And our monthly robotics job fair will be on March the 17th, again on Wednesday evening at 7 p.m. And this conversation, Society, Robots and Us, at the moment is on a monthly schedule at 6 p.m. Pacific time on the 4th Tuesday of the month. And again, you can see this on the Silicon Valley Robotics website calendars or on the Citrus People and Robots Lab calendars. Now, just to give you a very quick overview of our fantastic speakers today, we'll be joined by Henry and Jane Evans, Dr. Aaron Edsinger, Daniel Seita, Adriana Mallozzi, and Ken Goldberg, in that order. And our first speaker tonight is Henry Evans, who is the founder for the Robots for Humanity project. And I think he can tell his story better in his prepared slide deck, because Henry is a mute quadriplegic, as he will explain shortly. So I'm going to play Henry's presentation, and he and his wife, Jane, are here to also answer questions as well.
Sandra asked me to speak to you briefly today about a project I co-founded called Robots for Humanity. Robots for Humanity is about using technology to extend our capabilities, fill in our weaknesses, and let people, particularly disabled people, perform at their best. In today's presentation, I will quickly describe my personal situation, talk about the genesis of Robots for Humanity, show you some of the technology we have developed, and share with you an important lesson I learned about technology along the way. As for me personally, I won the rare health defect lottery almost 20 years ago, at the ripe old age of 40, and I have been a mute quadriplegic ever since. I developed an interest in technology when they showed me how to control the cursor on a computer with a head tracker. I am also able to click a simple on-off switch with some residual thumb movement. Head tracking devices sold commercially by the company Modern Tech convert my tiny head movements into cursor movements and enables my use of a regular computer. I can surf the web, exchange email with people, and routinely destroy my friend Steve's cousins in online word games. This technology allows me to remain engaged, mentally active, and feel like I am a part of the world. Access to a computer would prove to be critical in my next adventure, Robots for Humanity. One day, I was lying in bed watching CNN when I was amazed by Professor Charlie Kemp of the Healthcare Robotics Lab at Georgia Tech demonstrating a PR2 robot. I emailed Charlie and Steve Cousins of Willow Garage, and we formed the Robots for Humanity project. For about 2 years, Robots for Humanity developed ways for me to use the PR2 as my body surrogate. I shaved myself for the first time in 10 years. From my home in California, I shaved Charlie in Atlanta. I handed out Halloween candy. I opened my refrigerator on my own. I began doing tasks around the house. And so Robots for Humanity was originally co-founded by myself, Steve Cousins and Charlie Kemp at Willow Garage. After Willow Garage closed, Georgia Tech took up the mantle and funded another 5 years of Robots for Humanity research. This research led to several PhD dissertations, the latest of which was recently published in a peer-reviewed journal. In it, Philip Grice demonstrated a highly sophisticated piece of software which used augmented reality and a GUI to allow the precise control of a body surrogate robot with about 24 degrees of freedom by a disabled person using one simple on-off switch. But a robotic device does not have to be complicated to have a huge impact. The next device, simple by comparison, was also developed at Georgia Tech. It gives me the ability to adjust my own hospital bed, something I do several times every day. It's not an exaggeration to say it has changed my life. Let's watch. It also uses a Raspberry Pi to project a GUI on my computer so that I can click on it and adjust my own hospital bed whenever I want. And of course it is also wireless, except for the power cord. I just need a standard web browser. Steve Cousins' son, Jonathan, and his team at the University of Pennsylvania also built me a very useful device which enables me to scratch my own itches. What you are looking at here are the web pages which are wirelessly generated by the miniature computer in the Scratchbot. The images allow me to control the scratcher without assistance. I just point to the image of the commands with my head tracker and then click a simple switch. Here I am wirelessly directing it to my head. It greatly enhances my independence because no caregiver is needed. It feels great. The next machine is somewhat whimsical, but is the perfect example of my motto: if you want something, you look for options.
This innovative machine uses the EEG to detect blinking for control of a revolving straw and whiskey pump. Henry is able to sip single malts just by blinking to activate it. Let's watch. Whiskey straw. EEG. Robots don't have to be evil. I'm Henry Cleaver, and I build robots for humanity.
And that's the main focus of Robots for Humanity. To encourage engineers to use their knowledge of robotics to create devices which improve the plights of those of us who have not fared well in life's health lottery. It has certainly changed my life, and it is our goal to share our experiences and methods with people who find themselves in similar circumstances. Before I go, I'd promised to share a lesson I have learned about developing assistive technology. It turns out the degree of technical complexity bears no relationship to ultimate utility. In my experience, the most important metric is the degree to which it makes the caregiver's life easier. This discovery led me to coin the Caregiver Principle, which holds that no matter how much assistance a device provides to a patient, it will not be used regularly unless it also takes no time to either set up or use by the caregiver, and unless it makes the caregiver's life, net, a lot easier. The Caregiver Principle provides a nice transition to our next speaker, Dr. Edsinger from Hello, Robot. He will talk about Stretch, which represents the next generation of mobile manipulator. It is an order of magnitude lighter and less complex than PR2, the cobot in my video. His Hello, Robot co-founder, Dr. Charles Kemp, was also a co-founder of Robots for Humanity, and so many of the lessons we learned with the PR2 were incorporated into Stretch. I will be working with Stretch in my home this summer together with an occupational therapist. Now, without further ado, let's hear from Dr. Edsinger. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Henry. That was fantastic. I hadn't seen some of those videos. That was very cool. And so Henry's been an advisor to Hello Robot since almost the very first days. And my co-founder with Hello Robot is Charlie Kemp, who has been working with Henry for a long time. And so I'm going to show you a little bit about what we've been doing as Hello Robot. Let me see if I can share my screen here and go through some slides. Okay, so Hello Robot, we were founded about 3.5 years ago. We're based in California and also in Atlanta, Georgia. And this is Stretch. This is the robot that we've been toiling on for a number of years, and we launched it in July. And since we launched, we've seen a lot of really strong response, both from the research community in the assistive robotics space, more traditional robotics, people who are doing manipulation, machine learning, and also from commercial partners. So it's really been almost 50-50, the amount of the interest that we've seen. So it's really been a great sort of 6 months since we've launched it. And we have it at some of the leading universities already across the country. And with Stretch, what we did is we really tried to rethink a mobile manipulator from the ground up. And this was really informed by Robots for Humanity, where I think Charlie and Henry both felt the frustration of having this large refrigerator-sized machine that they had to transport and put in the home. And so we tried to make something that was portable, more like a vacuum cleaner than a refrigerator. And we also tried to really think about how can it be useful in assistive use cases? What are the properties of an assistive device that would make it useful for Henry and others? And also we really pushed hard to get the price down. So through clever design and clever sourcing, we've gotten the price about 1/10 of what some competing products might be, and also really reduce the overall complexity of it. So I'll just show a video, it's about 1 minute long, of, let's see here, hopefully this will. This is Stretch, this is my son Levi carting it in so you get a sense of the scale. Okay, and more broadly, we're interested in mobile manipulation because once you attach an arm to a robot and make it mobile, and we think of this actually as a mobile cobot, meaning it's a collaborative robot, it should be safe around people, and when it has an arm, you can do a lot of useful things that you can't do if you can just drive around. So these are our images from Charlie's lab. It shows feeding, dancing, medication dispensement, shaving Henry, and putting on a garment. But this technology is still very early, right? Manipulation in itself is still very much a research enterprise. But we do believe there are simple things you can do, like posing a shaver or a phone, that a mobile manipulator can do today and add value, right? And we really do believe in Henry's caregiver principle, and we really thought a lot about what are the things that we can do to make life both better for Henry, but also easier for a caregiver like Jane. And so with this background and Charlie's 10 years of experience in this field, we thought a lot about design and what would a robot look like if we started from scratch. And one thing we really thought about was a specialized assistive device versus a universal general purpose robot. And while Stretch isn't a humanoid, right? Doesn't look like a human, doesn't have a dexterous hand. It's meant to be more general purpose. And the reason for that is we believe that more general purpose devices can get economies of scale in production. And with that, you can invest in the engineering of making better UIs, better capabilities. And the example I like is, I recently had to find a fall detection system for my mom, who's a bit older. And on the left is one thing that I looked at, which is a pendant you wear and it's to plug into a docking station and looks kind of hideous. And on the right is what I chose in the end, which is an Apple Watch, which actually does a really nice job at fall detection. She likes to wear it. She thinks it's kind of cool. And, I think rather than building deliberately an assistive device, we're trying to build a company that can succeed and then make useful robots like Stretch available to people who could benefit from assistance. So that's our bigger strategy. And on the design side, one thing we really thought a lot about was the reach of a robot. And I think in the work with PR2 and other robots, I think what Charlie saw is often you have this hugely complex machine, yet it can't even reach the places that matter around a home, around a person, right? So reaching to the back of the countertop or even reaching across the bed to somebody. And so I'm going to show you a video we've never shown before, but this is an early prototype of Stretch, teleoperated by Charlie, and he's delivering pills from a drawer to his wife who's on the couch. And this is the first time that he's attempted this. So this is remote viewing through a web browser that's sped up 8 times. But you can kind of get a sense of what you could do, even just through direct teleoperation. And the key thing here is that it can reach all the way across the coffee table to his wife, and she doesn't have to kind of lean forward, get up, get out. And so really the workspace of the robot, it seems like a more technical thing, but it really is important in terms of a mobile manipulator that's useful. So finally, I'll just wrap up with, as a company, we have to build and sell product. We have to be a successful company. And Henry's been great in reminding us that, every time we have ideas about assistive technology, first we have to succeed as a company, right? Our long-term purpose is to help robots or have people have better lives with robots, right? Use technology for good. And so we're trying to build a successful company, a general purpose robot. And we've actually had great adoption in the assistive robotics community. One example is Microsoft was an early customer. They used Stretch in a hackathon. And they had an employee programmer who had cerebral palsy, and he was able to write code to use a voice interface to have Stretch get a glass of water for him. That was in a 3-day hackathon. So we've seen really cool projects that are just starting with the pandemic. The ramp on has been a little bit slower, but I think in the next year we'll see lots of more cool projects with Stretch, including we're going to be getting one to Henry's home, hopefully in April, May, I forget when exactly, but we're very excited for that as well. So with that, I'll hand it back.
Thank you so much, Aaron. And I'm so pleased that you're going to be able to get a Stretch to Henry's house. As someone who was studying human robot interaction, I would read about fantastic projects where, for example, people in aged care homes had access to robot pets, just as one example, without realizing that in most cases, those robots had to go back to the research lab whenever the project was finished. And I think that's something that we really need to, it would be good if robotics had the same bioethics that other branches of medicine do have, where if you're providing a clear benefit to someone's life, it is unethical to take it away from them. And now I'd like to introduce Daniel Seita, who is a computer science student at UC Berkeley. And he has a different aspect of accessibility to talk about. Over to you, Daniel.
Oh, thank you. And yeah, thank you for inviting me. And yeah, I have a high bar based on the quality of the first 2 presentations from Henry and Aaron, and seeing all the great work that they're doing. So yeah, just a quick introduction to build upon Andrew's introduction. So I'm a PhD student at Berkeley, and I work with the great Ken Goldberg here, who's also on the call. And my research area is in robotic manipulation and machine learning. So I combine the 2 and focus on trying to develop techniques for more robust, more reliable robot manipulation of things that are very complicated to manipulate, such as deformable. So in fact, when I was looking at the first 2 presentations, one of the things that I noticed was when the robots were manipulating clothes and towels, and I was trying to think about, how can we improve that process? And that's one of the areas that I focus on. And in terms of my experience, so for example, I'm hearing impaired, and my hearing loss categorizes me as deaf, and I wear hearing aids to hear sound. And in classes and labs and conferences, I use services such as captioning and sign language interpreting. And nowadays with the pandemic, I do a lot of video calls, and the automatic caption on services such as Zoom and Google Meet has advanced enough so that it's sufficiently good for many impromptu meetings that I have with my colleagues. So that's one of the few shining spot of this era for me. And in terms of the thing that I want to bring up, I kind of wanted to bring up, I guess, 3 different things. So first of all, I categorize myself as disabled, but one of the things I want to highlight is that the people with disabilities are a very huge minority group or a huge underrepresented group, and there's so much diversity within the community. And I would never want to say that like my experience is similar to those of people with other disabilities, or even those with other hearing impairments like myself. So I have a brother who's also hearing impaired, but he has a deeper hearing impairment than I do. So his experience would be much more challenging than mine would be with many academic, professional, or social settings. So that's one thing to consider when we consider the disability community. And in terms of when we like design robots for people, I think that it's going to be very important going forward to, if we're going to bring robots or general purpose robots to the home or to industry setting, we may want to consider that some people may not be able to interact with robots the same way that non-disabled people might be. So for example, the first thing that I think of when I think of, for example, a home robot that might get deployed in my house is there going to be any verbal communication? Like, how will I communicate with the robot? And that kind of human-robot interaction will need to consider many different circumstances, like different disabilities and different people's preferences. So that kind of thing, those kind of things will have to be considered when companies or when researchers design robots for people. And so the other thing that I wanted to bring up is just more like about the robotics community itself. So I think that there's many advantages, I would say, to increasing the diversity of the robotics community. And in terms of people with disabilities, I think as a general rule, I would say that people who have certain experiences have a more invested interest in making sure that technologies that are developed will be able to at least benefit themselves as well. So for example, with a disabled person, many of the people with disabilities who I know are working in, say, access technology or human computer interaction for improving service quality for deaf people, for blind people, for other disabilities. And while my focus doesn't, like my research doesn't focus on that, but from my perspective, I would be interested in making sure that just the entire field of robotics is very accessible to people from a diverse set of backgrounds. So one of the things that I often do is, for example, I often get in touch with people about people who might be organizing conferences or other events about trying to arrange some sort of services to make sure that there's captioning or sign language interpreting services that are set up. And many conferences in robotics and in machine learning are doing that today, these days. And that's one of the things that I really like about this field, and that people are very cognizant about the different experiences that people have. And I think that this more generally just increases the amount of empathy that people have and the amount of understanding that people have of those with different backgrounds. And yeah, so like the last thing is that sometimes people just need to be prodded to or reminded about providing these services or making sure that their products like robots or otherwise are accessible. And we do have a law about this in America. So in America, there was a 1990 American with Disabilities Act. It was passed a few years before I was born. So I had the privilege of having that law in effect for my entire life, and having was born in a family that understood that law and understood the details of it. So I know it's not a perfect law, and there are some unintended consequences of it, but it's been very helpful for me, giving me the opportunity to have sign language interpreting throughout my entire childhood growing up in New York and then being in going to Massachusetts and California, and yeah, I'm just hoping that the robotics community will continue to be accessible or increase the accessibility of their services, of their products, of their conferences. Yeah, and I think that'll help us go a long way in getting robots that are good for society, good for us, good for a broad range of people with disabilities and without. So yeah, I think that's the main thing I wanted to bring up. And yeah, I think that's it from me. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Daniel. I think you make very good points about the issues and the potential opportunities with conferences, for example. And I'm pleased to see that a lot of the conference organizations, the professional associations, are starting to take this more seriously and provide, well, it's mixed, shall we say. Whenever one conference does something well, then you discover that the conference straight after, for example, has no childcare, no disability-friendly rooms, or just you name it. It's one step forward and sometimes 1.5 steps backwards, although I do believe we are generally heading in a positive direction. Now, our next speaker is Adriana Mallozzi, who is the founder of Puffin Innovation. And I'm so pleased she was able to join us at fairly short notice. And I'm definitely looking forward to hearing more from you, Adriana. Over to you.
Hi, thank you. I'm Adriana. My startup was a result of winning an MIT assistive tech hackathon. And we are creating a mouth-operated input device. So people like myself with limited mobility in their upper extremities can control their mobile devices as well as computers. It's completely wireless and portable. We also have an app that goes along with it, so the user has complete control of the settings. And we're incorporating machine learning and AI so the device can adapt to the user instead of the typical way where we all have to adapt to our technology. So we're trying to change the narrative of assistive tech. Yeah, and wow, those presentations were amazing. I would love a stretch robot. I got to experience a robotic arm attached to my chair for 3 days. It was the JCO by Canova Robotics in Montreal, Canada. And I was able to, at the time I was like in my late 30s, and I was able to feed myself for the first time, give myself a drink for the first time. I easily held both of my dogs' leashes and walked the dogs. It was just the most amazing experience. And when they had to take it back, I literally felt like I lost a limb. Literally, like I felt the loss because I was able to do so much independently with this device. And of course, unfortunately, it costs way too much money for anyone to be able to buy it. So I did not have 60 grand just lying around to buy this device. So unfortunately, I had to give it back. But they let me use it for the weekend because I was showcasing it at the Abilities Expo here in Boston. So yeah, and that's about it.
Thank you so much, Adriana. And I think that's exactly the point about the ethics of providing equipment only for trial basis and having to give it back. Although I believe that we've seen an entire order of magnitude in the affordability of robotics compared to when the JACO arm from Canova was first developed. So I expect that we can provide the same quality of robot arm for 1/10 of the price of the JACO. And indeed, I think Stretch is a great example of surfing on the tide of more affordable robotics. But I do believe that Canova's been doing a great job because they've put so much care and attention into the user interface. And ultimately, the reliability and the usability of a robot is as important as the affordability factor too. Now, I'm encouraging everybody to put the questions into the chat first, but I think we'll have time to go around and ask the speakers if they want to speak to any of the questions directly as well. But I'd like to ask Ken to speak next. So Ken, over to you.
Thank you, Andra. I really appreciate it. This is a great group and terrific turnout tonight. And I'm very inspired by everyone, I have to say. Henry, in particular, Henry, Daniel, and Adriana, you know, I'm just struck by something you all have in common, which is a sense of humor. And you make us laugh in this really remarkable way. And it is something I'm actually curious if you can comment on that, because I actually have noticed that as a pattern, this sense of humor and positivity that is something I think we can all be inspired by. And I think that your insights are very helpful. And as Daniel said, the key idea of thinking about diversity, in cognitive diversity in all of these fields, especially you know, in design of new systems, is so important. So having your perspectives on the robots that we're thinking about and designing is so helpful, because we you know, it's so hard to anticipate where are these different aspects that you're responding to. And I think it's really interesting the way you're collaborating and working with other researchers and really being a part of those teams. I have to say that you know, in some way, my friend has is dyslexic. A friend of mine, Gil Gershoni, and he says he thinks of it as a superpower, that it actually gives him new insights that he didn't have, that he wouldn't have otherwise. And I'm also curious about that. In other words, how that you think of disability as opening up new opportunities for you, that as giving you insights that are not available to others. So I'd love to hear from you on that. I also, you mentioned ADA, Daniel, and I have to say I've been really enlightened about ADA recently. I think that COVID-19 has made us all much more aware of diversity across the board in so many different ways. And we've been talking about inclusive robotics, inclusive in many categories. And the ADA was very interesting because a lot of it was developed in the Bay Area at Berkeley, in fact. And so there's a wonderful history of this. And there's a film I just want to mention. I think most of you are familiar, but it's called Crip Camp. That one was nominated for Academy Award, and it's a fantastic film, a documentary that is just so wonderful in all respects. And I don't want to give away how it develops, but it's a great film. And so anyway, I want to just thank you all for being here and leave time for questions. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you so much, Ken. And let's just work a little backwards. What was the name of that film, please, from Nyasha?
Crip Camp, CRIP. as in Paul,
T.
R-I-P. So Crip, like cripples, Crip.
Mhm.
Crip Camp. It's on Netflix.
Ah,
And it's amazing. And Daniel, you are what we call the ADA generation, because your whole life has been during the ADA. So yeah. Can I answer Ken's question?
Mhm.
Is that cool? Okay.
please do go
So
ahead, Adriana.
a lot to address in that. One, I think a lot of us use humor to make non-disabled people feel comfortable being around people with disabilities. Oftentimes, non-disabled people just don't know how to act, even though they can just act like a person. And so, to kind of overcome that uncomfortableness, I think if we are able to find the humor in common things that happen to us because of our disability, it just helps lighten the mood. And then I want to address the super crypt idea. That's what we call it. And so, yeah, okay. So those of us in the disability advocacy space do not subscribe to the super crypt idea, right? We are proud disabled people. We do have different perspectives because the world is not built for us. And so we are innovative because we're kind of forced to be. We are inherent problem solvers because we have to be on the fly. But we do not, most of us do not subscribe to the idea of that it's a superpower. And so there's a lot of controversy with the idea of the quote unquote super crypt. And I think as you grow in the acceptance of your disability, as you become familiar with the community, right? So typically people with disabilities, especially people who are born with their disability, we don't learn this. And especially, we never learned what we saw in Crip Camp ever. Right? I was around when all that was happening, and I had no idea that was happening. I had no idea that there was someone like me that I could look up to, specifically Judy Heumann, when I was growing up. I had no idea she even existed. And she grew up in New York, and I grew up 45 minutes away from her. So no idea, I had no idea. And that's a problem. People with disabilities often don't learn about this until we're in our late 20s, early 30s. And that's a problem. That's a huge problem. And so it's really difficult to, you go through these stages, right, where you follow societal's depiction of disability. You use those euphemisms like differently abled and handy capable, which are horrible. And so, and then we learn once we become older, we're around other people like us, other people with disabilities, and we learn the history of the disability rights movement. And then we realized that it was all wrong, what we were taught growing up. and that it's okay to say the word disability. It's okay to say the word disabled. And there's a whole movement called #SayTheWord, meaning reclaiming the word disabled and disability, and take that power back, take away the negative stigma associated with disability. And also what Keay said is exactly right. When you're designing, you need to involve people with disabilities, because if you don't, you can't just assume that this particular person with this particular disability might have this challenge. That's not the reality. You need to have real people living with real disabilities included in the process of designing and developing your products. And I think I covered it all, and I think I spoke too much. So thank you.
I think you shared exactly what you needed to say beautifully. That was very powerful.
No, thank you, and I really appreciate. I think you're right, and I stand corrected. And I really appreciate you're correcting me on this. And I want to say, and I apologize in any way if I offended you or anyone. Because I'm learning, and I think it's a process. But I thank you for enlightening me. And I also I think it's really important, as you said, to learn to really reach out and engage and learn and be comfortable, learn how to be comfortable in these environments. So thank you for that.
Indeed. And thank you, Ken, for bringing that up. And Keay, your contributions in the chat have been amazing. Stephen, ditto. Sarah, in fact, so many people. Mamita, if I'm not crediting you, that's just my inability there. Nyasha, Joanne, MK, the contributions in the chat make great reading alongside of the discussion here. I would just like to ask now, Daniel, Henry, Aaron, do you have something to add in to follow on from Adriana's points?
I can add a little bit about the design process and including people with disabilities in that. So first off, at Hello Robot, we have a very iterative design process, which I think is fundamental to good design, where you can get feedback and kind of roll that in. And while we had some conversations with Henry, really a lot of our design came from the decade or so experience that Charlie Kemp had prior to the design of Stretch, and it was a direct reaction to some of the problems that he had seen in his work. And one thing we're very mindful of is people have very different types of needs in terms of a physical assistance device and also the user interface as well. And it actually makes it a challenge as well, because you can't devise just one interface, for example, that will address everyone well. And it's really quite a challenge. And one thing, right now, for example, we have a grant proposal under consideration with Wendy Rogers Lab at University of Chicago to look at, what can Stretch do and really have people with disabilities in the design loop. So, in this proposal, we want to have multiple iterations where we put it and try it out and get feedback about the design of the hand or where to put sensors or what type of interface it should have. But really, this is kind of a longer term prospect about how to inform the core product design. So over time, we hope these things converge. But with able-bodied people, the interfaces are more clear. And even with older adults, it's the same thing. There's such a wide variety of needs. It can be hard to have one hardware solution in particular that meets everything.
Thank you for addressing that. There were a few questions around the design and the technology of both the stretch system, but also, Daniel, about your work with laundry folding. I believe we have a couple of avid roboticists in the audience that are very, very keen to try their hand at robots that can do laundry. And would you speak to that a little bit, please, Daniel?
Oh, okay, yeah, I'll say a few words about the yeah, that part. So just to be clear, and I'm speaking in normal academic language here, like I don't have a real professional laundry folding robot. So in academia, we tend to focus on, you know, specific problems. We propose some algorithm to tap, and then we leave out some edge cases that we can't ignore if we're in industry building robots for real, for for commercial purposes. But so yeah, some of the work that I've been doing is mostly focused on if we have some kind of deformable, say a piece of clothing, a piece of fabric, or whatever, and we want to have some image that show the target position or a target configuration. How do we get a series of action of the robot to modify the deformable so that it gets to the target? And then we focus on machine learning techniques or data-driven techniques to figure out what the robot should do. Usually they're pick and place actions. So the robot goes to one spot, loads its gripper, grips something, raises, goes to another spot, and then releases. And we do a series of that to accomplish the robot's objective. So, but yeah, that's the quick overview of the deformable manipulation work that we're doing in our lab with Ken Goldberg and others.
I just want to add, so Daniel, you did a great job summarizing, and Daniel, by the way, is one of my star students. He's fantastic. He is doing incredible projects, a number of them in the lab, and I also see Animesh Garg is here. They work together, and one of the things I want to also, I think it's important to emphasize is the real limitations of robots today, that we're not yet ready to have a robot that can really fold laundry in any kind of commercial or cost-effective way, and it's surprisingly challenging. So it's something that's in the research lab, but I'm sorry to say we're not going to have it out. It's not going to be out there for another at least 5 to 10 more years.
Well, that's a great point for us to hear a parting request from our speakers is, what is the robot you really want to see? Or perhaps just the task that you really want a robot to help with. And the robot has not perhaps been invented yet, but we might be able to inspire some people on it. I see Kiki's been sharing her desire for the clothes hanging robot, reducing her natural gas usage and, being environmentally sustainable. Henry, is there some robot that you want to see in the future that we can start working on now?
So Henry and I communicate mainly with a letterboard, and this came out of necessity. When Henry had a basal artery dissection, it's an artery in the brainstem, and the walls inside the artery collapsed almost 20 years ago due to a birth defect. And at first he was literally, he said he was felt like he was locked in cement. So, but he could blink his eyes as the days went on. And that's how we started to communicate with yes and no. One blink was yes and 2 blinks for no. And then we needed more complex thoughts. So we divided the alphabet, and he'd blink on the section he wanted. And then I'd go through each letter, and then he would blink, and I would have a notebook and write down all the letters. And then we graduated. His brother saw this on the internet on a piece of cardboard with letters, and there was a hole in the middle. And we talked so much, the cardboard disintegrated. So one of his speech therapists said, you need an acrylic board. And so our son kind of helped put lines in here and made it more clean and everything. And I watch his eyes, and I do word prediction kind of. We've been married for 33 years, so we know each other very well, and that helps. But what Henry was saying to you on the letterboard was, he would love to see a smaller robot with the capabilities of PR2. Did I get that right? Somewhat? Okay. FOR4TSTA for starters. AN and THE, then FIN, and then find MOR, and then find is what you wanted to say, and then find more TUSE, uses, and then find more uses. So for starters, start with a smaller robot with the capabilities of PR2, and then find more uses after that.
So what Stretch is doing, but perhaps with additional manipulators, I think PR2 having dual manipulators is the significant difference that I see. Although PR2 was also famous for folding laundry, Keay, but perhaps not the sort of robot that you can fit into the laundry room, whereas it's really impressive, the footprint that Stretch occupies. Well,
say something else. Excuse me a second. He wants to say something else. Let's see. THI, this, STUMM, this summer. W will, FIN, find. O, we will find out. WH, what? S, stretch, can do. This summer we will find out what Stretch can do. Yes, we're very excited.
That is great. And this is the point that Keay again was raising, that you need to involve people with disabilities into the design process as early as possible to develop the capabilities and to take the design in the direction that it needs to go to overcome the obstacles that might happen in a poorly thought out design process as well. And we've gone over time now, but it's been so good talking to you and talking to everybody else on the call today. I can't thank you enough for joining us. And I hope that Silicon Valley Robotics can act as a more active central connection point for technologies, for assistive technologies, and for people with disabilities. And I think if I can inspire some people to help us with grant writing to be able to distribute more robots in the community, and at the very least to be providing more of a central information hub for what good technologies are being developed and are out there, because I am seeing so many good things happening in different research labs where many people are not going to be aware that they're on offer. And I think the point that Adriana made it really hit home to me, that it doesn't matter how good the assistive tech you develop is if it stays in the laboratory and if people with disabilities are not aware that it is an option. And I want to finish with one piece of news. I popped it into the chat. Joanne shared it with me a day or so ago. In Tokyo, they've opened a restaurant that is being operated by robots that are being teleoperated by people with disabilities. And it is allowing people to have useful work that involves social interaction with people. And it sounds like a really interesting initiative. I do believe, looking back, it's taken 2 years of planning for this to go from a plan to an actual open restaurant. I put the news into the chat. I don't know any more about the project, but I'm very interested in finding out more. And perhaps we can have a robot cafe here in the Bay Area or in Boston, where Adriana is. And I do encourage everybody to also go firstly to Robots for Humanity and the link is in the chat, or it will be in a second. The link is also on the Silicon Valley Robotics site, and the Puffin Innovations link is also in the chat. And that's the company that Adriana started to develop technologies suitable for people with disabilities, both by people with disabilities and for people with disabilities. And I think that's a wonderful initiative. And yes, perhaps we will start a Silicon Valley Robots Without Borders chapter. It's a great idea, Stephen. But again, thank you everybody for joining us today. And we'll look forward to extending this discussion. We think that perhaps next month we will talk a little bit more about prosthetics, bionics, exoskeletons, and those technologies for augmenting augmenting humans and for replacing functionality that is missing or damaged. And perhaps we need a whole section on interface technologies as well, on the extension of brain-computer interface and haptic technologies. We're open to suggestions for topics for our monthly discussion. We're really focusing now on inclusive robotics as the topic that we're exploring. So please let me know if you have suggestions, and please look at the other videos from previous sessions as well on YouTube, of course. So thank you all tonight, and good night.